Day one of Trump's new presidency is also day one of a Liberal cabinet retreat on how to deal with this threat of tariffs. Ministers gathered in Montebello, Quebec today. They did not have to contend with fresh U.S. tariffs. But earlier, on Power and Politics, Foreign Affairs Minister Mélanie Joly stopped well short of declaring victory.
We've done the work, and meanwhile, we'll continue to do the work on the question of tariffs, because at the end of the day, we want to make sure that we defend Canada's interests, but also we need to make sure that people around Trump, the president himself, but people around him, and also key Republican senators are aware of what would be at stake.
Let's get some reaction from opposition parties now. Jagmeet Singh is the leader of the federal NDP, and he joins you now. Mr. Singh, it's good to see you. Thank you for being on the show today.
Good to see you. Thanks for having me on.
You criticize the Liberals for not having a coordinated approach to Donald Trump, but there's no tariffs today. What's your reaction to the lack of direct action by the president on this?
Well, I wouldn't take this as a meaning that Donald Trump is not going to move forward. I think it's clear that he's made the threat. He repeated a vague threat again, did not name Canada, but I think we need to be prepared. And as I said before, the only thing that Trump will understand is strength, so we need to be ready to respond to any tariffs against Canada with tariffs in kind, retaliatory tariffs, dollar for dollar. I said in addition, we need to look at ways of escalating that to mount the pressure, to increase the pressure, to get him to back away. And if there is a trade war, it's not something we want, it's not something we're looking for, but if he brings it, I also want to send a message to working Canadians that might feel that their jobs might be impacted. I want you to know that a new Democrat government will always have your back and support you, and I'll continue to push for ways that we support workers so they're not the ones bearing the brunt of this.
Okay, dollar for dollar, and when you say escalating, does that mean beyond dollar for dollar? You would escalate beyond dollar for dollar even if he comes at a full 25% across the board?
Yeah, we need to look at all tools, and so consider if the harm is not being felt by the United States, we need to look at other ways that we can increase the pain or increase the pressure. One of the things that I suggested was to say critical minerals. This is something that we know that China said no to the U.S. So really the only viable, sustainable choice for the United States to get critical minerals is from Canada. We can turn off the tap on that. That's something that would directly impact Elon Musk, who is pretty prominent in the Trump administration. His batteries for his Tesla rely on that. That's something that would immediately put pressure on them to say back away from picking a fight with Canada.
But dollar for dollar, Mr. Singh, if it's a 5% tariff, 4% tariff, maybe even the 10% tariff, that seems doable. 25% is on $600 billion worth of goods, and those would be costs borne by Canadians. You're talking $150 billion right there, in addition to the economic misery caused by whatever Donald Trump does. The current government seems to think that that is just too far, too fast. You're willing to do that? That go on 25% on $600 billion if that's what he does?
Well, I think we need to be ready to do that. And so what I've said from the beginning is that when we take an approach towards mounting the pressure on Trump in response to whatever he does to us, we need to be ready to respond in kind. And all tools need to be on the table. We need to look at every option. That's the type of strength we need to bring to this fight to make sure it is clear that if Donald Trump picks this fight, a fight that we do not want, a fight that we would not start, but if he does pick it, that it's not just going to be Canadians that feel the pain, Americans will as well. That is the only way we can ensure that Donald Trump backs away from this.
Right, but you've seen the analysis, I'm sure you've read the analysis that has been done on this, that if Trump goes ahead with the 25% tariff, you're looking at up to 4 to 5 percentage points of GDP just gone. So that's a full-blown recession, and retaliatory at an equal level compounds that even further. So, I mean, how does a much smaller economy with a much smaller population like Canada handle that? I mean, I appreciate you want to retaliate and inflict pain on the Americans, but the calibrated approach versus the broad approach, one inflicts pain, but the broad approach hurts Canadians as much or more than it hurts the Americans.
Well, I'm saying all the tools should be on the table, and we should be ready to go as far as that and look at options beyond it. That's why I suggested things like critical minerals. That's not where we start at. That's not our starting point, but that's something that we need to keep on the table, that we are prepared to go to that level. There is only one way to fight back. There is no other way. We have to be able to fight back by applying pressure on the Americans, on the United States, letting them know that it's going to hurt. The way we escalate it, where we start and where we end up, all of that is something that can be, we can adjust as makes sense, but we need to be prepared to have a serious fight so that we can defend Canadian jobs. And in doing so, we also need to be prepared for the harm. Whether we respond or not, a 25% tariff on Canadian goods will mean hundreds of thousands of Canadian jobs are lost. So we need to make sure we're ready to protect those workers, support them, but we do need to respond to tariffs applied on us. It is the only way we can fight back.
You mentioned critical minerals. You haven't mentioned oil. Daniel Smith says hands off oil. What do you say?
I think it is irresponsible to take any tool off the table prematurely. We may not end up there, but we certainly shouldn't remove one of the tools that is a tool on the table before we actually get to the negotiation table, before we actually get this settled. So no, we should not take any tool off the table. I'm concerned about Daniel Smith's approach in general. She seems more interested in cozying up with Donald Trump than fighting for Canadian jobs. In fact, I would say the same of Pierre Poilievre, who received an endorsement from Elon Musk, and someone who's a part of an administration that has threatened our sovereignty, threatened Canadian jobs, threatened to increase an already high cost of living. And when given the chance to reject that endorsement, he said, no, he's a great guy. He complimented the guy that's part of an administration that is threatening our very sovereignty. That is not a joke that you want to accept. I think any patriot, any Canadian would say, no, I'm not going to accept the endorsement of a billionaire who's threatening Canadians and Canadian jobs in that way. And so it shows you the type of person Pierre Poilievre is. The billionaires think that he's their yes man. He is in their pockets. And Elon Musk thinks, this is my guy in Canada, that Poilievre will do whatever we need of him. Trump thinks the same. That's not someone who's going to be able to stand up to Trump.
Look, it's very uncertain times, right? And we didn't sort of get the clarity on precisely what Donald Trump and his administration may do in relation to tariffs today, as many people had expected. And in the backdrop of all of this, Mr. Singh, as you all know, the Liberals are going through their troubles and picking a new leader on the 9th of March. Is there anything that can happen between now and the 24th of March, when Parliament is set to return, that changes your mind on where you are in voting non-confidence and forcing an election at the first possible opportunity? Because we don't know what's coming out of the U.S. We don't know where things are going to be here. Is there anything between now and the 24th that could change your mind, or are we dead set on an election in April or May of this year?
No, I've been really clear on this point, and thank you for the question. I'm going to reiterate it. We will be voting against the government at the earliest occasion. It's clear now that people feel, and they tell me again and again, they feel let down by the Liberals. They don't want to give them another chance. So the next election is going to be between Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives, who want to cut the things that you need, and it's going to cost you a lot. It's going to cost people the cut to daycare, the cut to dental care, or New Democrats who want to lower your bills and build homes you can afford and defend the things that make people's lives better.
Well, what if we're in the middle of that economic crisis that you were just talking about, right? You know, there is a 25% tariff. Workers are suffering. Parliament needs to be recalled so Parliament can approve what would be presumably billions, if not tens of $billions in aid to help them. And an election means caretaker mode, no new spending, no ability to help people for the 5-6 weeks that a national campaign is happening. I mean, the conditions that exist on the 24th of March are irrelevant. It's time to get rid of the Trudeau Liberals, and that's it for you?
Well, if they want to do something, I suggested calling back Parliament now, given how serious this all is. If they were interested in getting things done, they could do it now. We have 2 months before.
Well, there has to be a confidence vote as the first thing, right? When you come back after a prorogation, right? Reply to the speech.
Of the Liberals, though.
Well, a reply for the speech of the throne, and then estimates need to be passed, and both of those are going to be confident. No, understood. But we are where we are, and I'm not putting responsibility on you for the state of Parliament.
We are because of the Liberals. They made that choice.
Completely agree.
Trade war threatened in a position where we were threatened by a trade war, in a position where there was clear indication of a 25% tariff potentially being imposed on Canada, the Liberals chose to prorogue. That was their decision. If they were serious about protecting Canadians, we could be in Parliament now, putting in place changes to EI, different supports in place to protect workers from a potential blowback. But that was their decision.
Right, but just quickly on that, Mr. Singh, like, how do you bring back Parliament at any point early before the 24th of March, given that you, Mr. Blanchette, and Mr. Poilievre have all said non-confidence immediately? So they'd have to have a throne speech because Parliament needs to be summoned back after a prorogation. There will be a confidence vote right out of the gate. I mean, it seems as if there is no flexibility in Canadian politics now to respond to things the way they might need to be responded to because of the positions everyone has taken. Am I understanding you that nothing changes no matter what? Yeah,
that's a decision that the Liberals made. They could have had Parliament be back in session. We could have been voting on things that needed to be done for Canadians. They chose to prorogue. We're going to be voting against the government at the earliest opportunity.
Okay. Federal NDP Leader Jagmeet Singh sticking to his guns. Thank you so much for joining us today, sir. We appreciate your time.
Thank you.
We're going to get to the power panel right now because Donald Trump is holding off for now on tariffs against Canada, but it is only day one of his 4-year presidential term. And Canada's premiers were asked whether they're relieved, and the response was mixed.
I'm not saying that we won and it's over with Mr. Trump. It may happen tomorrow morning.
He did say that he's going to apply tariffs across the board, and I feel he's going to be targeting Canada, specifically Ontario. Make no mistake about it, he's coming for us.
I'm optimistic that as we build the relationships, talk about that, meet the Americans where they are, help to support their international goals, I think we can maintain that relationship. I think we need to stop with the threats and start talking about diplomacy and collaboration, because that's where we're going to find a solution.
It's time to bring in the power panel as we wait for the president to speak. Rob Russo is the former CBC Parliamentary Bureau Chief, now the Canada correspondent for The Economist, not the Canada Economist. Lisa Raitt is a former Conservative cabinet minister. Brad Levine is a former national campaign director for the NDP. And here with me in studio is Vandana Cotter. She is a former advisor to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. It's good to see you all here on Inauguration Day. We're gonna get started. The president will get started at a certain point, and that is going to interrupt us. He's walking past the lectern. Okay, so Rob, let's start with you. Dominic Leblanc says this shouldn't be seen as a reprieve on tariffs, but no tariffs today. How do you interpret whatever this means?
We don't know. He's mercurial, he's volatile, he's whimsical, he's capricious, and he loves to have those who he likes to antagonize dance what I call the tarantella of torment. So if he can string this out, I'm sure he's going to enjoy it. But today, TikTok was more important than tariffs. The president of TikTok was sitting right there with all the other tech bros, right beside Tulsi Gabbard, who's going to be the intelligence czar, and who, if you listen to any other intelligence official before her, would have been crying out warnings about the dangers of TikTok and the dangers it represents for U.S. national security. So if you think about what kind of a change there is as a result of President Trump becoming president again today, there's a prime example right there. So I think a reprieve from the hanging is or a stay of execution is probably not a bad way of looking at it. But he's making us dance, and he's enjoying it.
You know, Vandana, it's interesting. You look at who was there. You know, Zuckerberg obviously controls Meta. Bezos owns the Washington Post. Musk, we know Musk. Like all the modern information economy, all tech, all different than a regulated, all sitting there with Donald Trump as he takes power. What do you make of what we saw today and the lack of action against Canada and Mexico directly?
Well, I think two things. I think on the tech piece, I think they know where their bread is buttered.
They sure
right?
do.
They know how to work with Mr. Trump. They use their platforms and they amplify what he needs to amplify. They help with his base, so they know how to make money, and they know who to be close to make sure that happens, and who's in the sphere of influence. I think for today, like, Canada can breathe a sigh of relief. That isn't going to include for tomorrow or the day after. I think all the work that Mr. Blanc and others are doing, industry officials, to go make those relationships and make the case for Canada, I'm hoping that's being effective, right. And that's part of that. That's showing that the American economy, especially certain states, will be crippled based on these tariffs as well, and Canada will respond. So I'm happy today, but that doesn't mean tomorrow. I think all the premiers, as well as Mr. LeBlanc, are saying it right, that there's no need to take your foot off the pedal. They still have to prepare for whatever can happen. He's a moody guy. Today, he wants to focus on tech. Yeah. Tomorrow, we say the wrong thing or something else bothers him, it'll become a priority for him again.
Lisa, do you take any hope from the fact that today Donald Trump was all about reducing costs and affordability and expanding access to energy rather than starting a trade war with his two closest trading partners and allies? Because that was his focus, and these tariffs will go counter to a lot of those goals.
Okay, so let's start with the last part. He doesn't believe what you just said at the end.
This is true. Yes, this is true.
To affordability. So for him, talking about affordability, talking about the things he talked about today, the way in which he's going to achieve that is through tariffs. I found it more interesting for me to listen to what the incoming Secretary of Commerce said later on in the afternoon, where he laid out the thesis as to why they're going to put tariffs on at the border and the things that they are going to pay for that Americans are currently paying for, that Americans shouldn't be paying for, quite frankly, in their point of view. And he, from top down, it's not just Donald Trump having these ideas. He has picked a group of people around him who are going to implement and execute, whereas in the past administration, they really didn't have the ability to do so at the front end. They do now. They are definitely going to be able to do what they say they want to do. And his thesis is really clear. He wants to make things more affordable for Americans. He wants to be making sure that there are jobs at home, that there's an economy for Americans, because in his view, America has done great things for the world and the world has taken advantage of them. And the way to get back at the world, including Canada, is by putting tariffs on the border. So I wouldn't I wouldn't do the victory lap yet. Not that anybody in Canada is doing the victory lap by any means, but I would just say that this is a long slog, and we're rubbing up against an ideological point of view.
Yeah, Brad, I don't think anyone can do a victory lap at any point probably in the next 48 months, just because, that's how much time he has, and who knows what he will do. But a day without the 25% tariffs is a better day than with them. I mean, what do you take from what we've seen and heard today? Because the clarity isn't there. There is still this concern dangling over everything.
Well, yeah, and he did lay out his principle about why he would want tariffs, and that is the idea of lowering costs for his citizens and instead of raising taxes on Americans to help the world, he wants the world to help offset tax cuts for Americans. So we understand the principle. Keeping those with whom you're negotiating off balance is part and parcel of his whole approach. So by threatening tariffs on day one and they're not bringing them in, we'll all go, okay, so we survived the day, but when will he bring them in? Keeping us on our, on our back heels for the duration. There is, some reason for looking at, him asking for his agencies to look into the effects and the effectiveness of these tariffs, and whether or not we want to put a lot of hope on that. But it does provide some new information as to where maybe some of our efforts can go. By applying a 25% tariff on Canada's oil, will raise the gallon of gasoline for American drivers by 75 cents to $1 a gallon. That is not what he ran on. That's not what he was saying today. So I think that while I don't know if a rational approach is necessarily important for him, but for the agencies that will be looking into whether or not tariffs are an effective lever for him to use in order to bring about his policy desired outcomes, I think provides us with something new today that we didn't have yesterday.
Okay, if you're just tuning in, this is a special extended edition of Power and Politics. What you're seeing there is the latest moment in the inauguration day of President Donald Trump. This is the Capital One Arena in Washington, D.C. This has all been moved inside because of the cold weather in the U.S. Capitol, and President Trump is expected to address the audience there and maybe sign some more executive orders to give us some clarity on what his at least short-term agenda will be. I'm David Cochran. Of course, this is Power and Politics. We're here with the Power Panel. And Rob Rousseau, let's pick up on your point about tech. It's day one of 1,461 days of the Trump term. And you made the point that Zuckerberg, Musk, Bezos, TikTok, people and companies like that were all there. This is the modern information economy sitting in the front row of the Trump inauguration. And Canada's about a year away from having to go back and do a trade renewal. And social media is so important to getting messages out. They're all at one side of the table in that negotiation. Is that what Canadians should draw from this when you see that alignment of the tech oligarchs?
Well, I think we should see it as, again, emblematic of the new era we're in. And it's not just tech. It's also or social media. It's also other media. We see the revered institutions like the Washington Post changing their slogan, saying that they're going to change their posture in terms of reporting. We see it in the way business, not just the tech moguls, but other business leaders have decided that they needed to contribute in record amounts to Mr. Trump's inauguration. I think Facebook's leader, his name escapes me for a moment, Mark Zuckerberg,
Yeah.
has said that we're at a cultural tipping point. And I think that's what that reflects, that we are at a cultural tipping point. We see it in Democrats. When we see people like Gretchen Whitmer and John Fetterman, the Democratic senator from Pennsylvania, say, look, we're going to have to try and work with this guy, whereas they would have been opposing him 8 years ago, hammer and tongs. The era has changed. This is Trump's world, and these people are recognizing it. But it's astounding to see us go from stupefaction, which is where we were, I think, 8 years ago, to resignation, if not genuflection. And I think in terms of Canada, I think what we need to pay attention to, because we don't know what he's going to do, is this exposed some very, very serious weaknesses and divisions in our position and in our posture. And we need to deal with those immediately. And it's not going to be the responsibility of Justin Trudeau to do that. It may not be the responsibility of the next Liberal Prime Minister to do that, but somebody needs to get the act together immediately.
So, Bhavandhan, I wonder about this, right? That you rely, when you're in a trade negotiation, on traditional media to get your message out. But increasingly, there's fewer people like me and a whole lot of social platforms out there. And the people who run those social platforms set the algorithms and have big thumbs on the scale are with Trump in a big way. Elon Musk's going to have an office in the West Wing, we learned today.
Mm-hmm. None of this surprises me. You can see the writing as it goes on the walls. And I think the American people voted this guy. Not just like, okay, we don't know how actually he's going to be, but this is the second time, and they voted for him in numbers, like decidedly. And the same, a lot of people worship these guys. They worship Elon Musk. They see them as creators, and from their platforms, other voices that probably would not have been able to be on mainstream media, but have been able to call themselves media, call themselves a subject matter expertise, and share those ideologies that align with Donald Trump and a lot of these tech figures. So, it is something that I think people need to understand how to utilize these things, knowing that there's not knowing that people do control this. But I think in terms of how people get their message out, they have to be more creative about this. Like I read a piece, I watched something on YouTube today, which I don't often do, about Pierre Poilievre and how he's been able to capitalize off YouTube. And current other parties, like the Liberal Party, have to get behind that too and try to figure out how they can get their message out and use people like their own influencers to share their message. And I think they've been very much behind the times on that, but there's no turning back now. So as much as for a lot of times people look down on this, they look down on Trump, they look down on Elon Musk and others, or how they operate on a day-to-day, they're here. And you have to deal with them.
Well, they're here, Lisa, and they're extremely powerful, right? And increasingly, they are the dominant news sources for people. So how do you approach the NAFTA renegotiation next year if the Silicon Valley team is sort of so completely lining up behind the White House like this?
Well, I mean, are you saying to me that this is the first time ever that the private sector is infiltrating the White House?
No, I'm not saying that. I think it's the first time ever. No, I think it's the first time ever 3 billionaires have controlled information flows so utterly and completely, like Meta and Musk do right now, right? Like I think we're in a big period of disruption right now, especially if like NPR goes away and PBS in the U.S. and who knows what's going to happen to this show and this company in Canada. But those guys are going to be around over the next couple of years, and they are ascendant and maybe more influential than ever.
And one could say that Oprah Winfrey and Bill Gates equally had in their moment in time with the Democratic government the same kind of influence over people, over media. And I guess what I'm saying is that I don't think we should not be concerned, but don't assume that this is just a new phenomenon that's happening in American politics. It's not. This has been the case for many years. And what you are seeing now is it displayed in public as opposed to behind the scenes, behind the doors of the White House, where small tables would come together and make decisions. And now you're seeing, well, these guys are going to be part of it. They're walking into the government. And don't take this as me saying it's good or bad, but I just don't think that we should paint it as only a phenomenon that's happening right now. How do we approach it is the question, though. Okay. The reality is that we only have one way to approach this, and that is to make the best case that we can to the Americans as to why we are important to them, for their purposes, why we're good for them. Doesn't matter what we are for us. It's all about them when it comes to negotiation. But for us, we better get our act together and do more things domestically, internally, and start building relationships internally again. I mean, I'm very curious to know that if Trump decides he's not going to put a tariff on oil and gas for all the great reasons that you've already said earlier in the program, are we going to ask Alberta to withhold their oil and gas because he has applied it to other parts of the Canadian economy? That stuff does have to be sorted out before we get into any kind of negotiations with the United States. And we're nowhere near that kind of understanding amongst the provinces.
No, look, I don't disagree on that, and you can flip it around. I mean, if Trump specifically targeted Alberta oil and gas, I think you would expect the other provinces to rally to Danielle Smith's defense. So the premiers need to find some alignment at their table as well. But Brad, just one more point just on the media ecosystem as it's evolving. Like Lisa's right, rich, powerful, famous people have always had influence in U.S. politics. I'm not suggesting that. But I don't know if we've ever seen companies with the power of these tech companies. They're nation states. They don't get taxed because they can lean on people and they control the flow of information, and their algorithms dictate the reality that ordinary people have because of the way the information flows to them. And so it is interesting to see them converging at the inauguration of President Trump today in terms of what this country is facing in the next 2 to 3 years on the trade and negotiation front. Just your quick thoughts on that before we move to our next topic.
Right. Trump being very transactional. You can see who's surrounding himself with when you take a look at certain cabinet and those in the sphere of influence. It's all multimillionaires or billionaires themselves. So it's really the rich taking over the apparatus of the White House and, by extension, the Republican Party and therefore Congress. So, but I think the fundamental difference, very quickly, is that I think these millionaires and billionaires are surrounding themselves with, around Trump in order to enrich themselves as opposed to exerting some kind of a political philosophy. Elon Musk made a fortune by doubling down on Trump, handing out millions of his own dollars to get people to vote for him, and his stock went through the roof. All of the people who are around Trump, you take a look at their companies, all their stock has increased tremendously. So American shareholders, those that are buying stocks, are basically gaming out the system. Who's around Trump, who will exert influence, and buying that company's stock and making themselves very rich. So it's not just who's got the influence, it's who's got the influence and making money for themselves and those that are following. I think it's a little different than it has been when millionaires ran the White House in administrations past.
Well, I can tell you I have no money and no influence, so it certainly isn't me.